Moving pivot points. Scalings and rotations occur around a fixed point called the object's pivot point. By default, an object's pivot point is at the origin for that object. If you use the pivot manipulator to reposition the pivot point, you can change how scalings and rotation occur. You use the pivot manipulator in the same way as the move manipulator. Use one of the three arrows to move the pivot point in either the X, Y, or Z directions of the world. Or you can move the pivot point freely in any of the three planes, XY, XZ, or YZ, by clicking one of the squares at the center of the manipulator, which then turns yellow, and dragging the pivot point. Note that when you use the pivot manipulator, the object does not move, only its pivot point moves. Each of these two bikes has its own pivot point. The bike on the right has its pivot point at its origin, and if I rotate it, the bike rotates around its own center. But when I rotate the bike whose pivot point was moved, rotation occurs in space around the pivot point, and not at its origin. For these two bikes, the bike on the left has its pivot point located at the rear of the bike, flush against the wall. And the bike on the right still has its pivot point at its origin. If I scale the bike on the right, the bike expands in all directions, even through the wall. If I scale the bike on the left, the bike expands away from its pivot point and away from the wall. This is a useful technique when you have two objects touching each other, and you want to scale one object, but still keep the two surfaces in contact.